Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I'm Deepak, your host from India. Today we are honored to welcome Dr. David De Cremer, a distinguished voice in the world of business and leadership. Before we get started, I would like to introduce today's guest. Dr. David De Cremer is a professor of management and technology and Dunton Family Dean at Northeastern University's D'Amore McKim School of Business, known globally for innovation in management and technology education. A renowned behavioral scientist and leadership thinker, he explores how humans and smart technology shape the future of business and society. Before joining Northeastern, he held key academic and research roles at NUS, Cambridge, Stanford, and Harvard. A best-selling author and award-winning global thought leader, Dr. David's fascinating book, The AI-Savvy Leader, published by Harvard Business Review Press, continues his mission to make AI work for people and organizations worldwide. In today's episode, Professor David joins us to unpack the central ideas from his acclaimed book, The AI-Savvy Leader, 9 Ways to Take Back Control and Make AI Work. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David De Cremer to the conversation. Professor David, it's a distinct privilege to welcome you to Business Talk. We are grateful to you for accepting our invitation.
Deepak, thank you for having me. It's a privilege as well, and I very much look forward to our interview.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, in the book you argue that many AI failures happen because leaders step back and let technologies drive the agenda. What does it look like in practice for a leader to step forward and reclaim that role without needing to be an AI expert themselves?
It's a very good question. It's also a very big question. So allow me to dissect it a little bit. Actually, your question is one of the motivations that led me to write this book, The AI Savvy Leader, because what I noticed is that, and many of your listeners will have noticed this as well, is that we talk about AI. It's inevitable, it's everywhere, it's going to change everything, and a lot of fears come along with it, but also a lot of uncertainties. I always say jokingly, anyone who says they're an AI expert, they're lying. We just don't know enough about what will happen, but we have some ideas here. And when I say this, it's very relevant into business, into corporations, because as you pointed out, it's mainly the IT departments, the technology trained people who drive AI adoption. Business leaders seem to sideline. And some people may say intuitively, is this a problem? Because AI, after all, is a technology. It's a new technology. We seem to be able to do a lot with it. And it's groundbreaking because it's also existential. We've always outsourced our body. We have a car, we have a train. Now we seem to be able to outsource our brains and cognition as well, which is a big thing. So, of course, it's technology, and technology people should drive it. But we're talking about business here. And usually, tech people are not trained into asking the right business questions. And this comes down then to the point AI needs to have a purpose. It needs to have a vision. What is it that we're using AI for exactly? And that is, when it comes down to corporations, the responsibility of business leaders. Now, unfortunately, they sideline. And unfortunately, we also see that this leads to 80 to 90% of AI failures. So we talk so much about it's going to be everywhere, but of course, the voices that we hear in the public debate are usually the CEOs of the big tech companies, the Magnificent Seven. Obviously, they advocate AI as a solution, as a product. How to leverage it, that's usually not being addressed. And that's because business leaders are absent in that process. And they have that fear because they say, I'm not trained as a technologist. Why would I don't even understand AI? Hence why AI savviness is a requirement for any business leader. Now, I also see it as really a neglect of your business responsibilities if you, as a business leader, are not part of that AI adoption process. Because an AI adoption process is actually also an organizational transformation. You bring in a new technology that is capable of doing certain tasks of a job. Not a job, We always confuse this. AI does a task. A job is much more. A job also entails dealing with people, politics, power dynamics, relationships. It's much more to bring it together. So you could say the whole of it is much more than the sum of individual tasks. So in that sense, AI can be a facilitator, an assistant to augment how people work more effectively and actually work even better in ways that they are already good at. Again, that requires management of people. And the recent research shows most of the AI adoption is driven by either the CIO, Chief Information Officer, or the CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and the IT departments. And again, that's where they see it as an engineering exercise. And when we think like an engineer, we have a fixed project. We have an input and we have an output, but we don't look at it in a holistic way. And AI adoption can only reveal productivity, innovation, efficiency if it's implemented consistently and used consistently across the entire organization. So we need more than simply the engineering mindset. It is also how to deal with human behavior, with the different departments, eliminate silos, establish collaboration and trust. And that's why it's so essential, business leaders, because that's their tasks, that they're involved. Even more so, they need to put the strategy out there. Too many business people, boards, the C-suite, they actually see AI almost as this miracle, this magical solution. We bring it in, and right away, in a direct effect, there's productivity and innovation. It doesn't work like this. AI can only be leveraged if you put AI there where the work really happens. And where the work really happens, that's usually where humans work. So you see that integration is needed to put that strategy out there. Now, it's not as simple as it used to be. It's simply, as a business leader, you have your strategy, you manage your people, you coordinate, and you establish that collaboration. Now you have to do so in the context of a new tool that could actually be a coworker, which is artificial intelligence. So you need a certain level of AI savviness. But AI savviness is different than saying I'm an AI expert. It's not about learning to code. It's really about understanding what are the strengths of an AI, but also limitations, because that will help you to decide where you use AI and where you don't use AI. Yes, right. Sometimes you will not use AI because it's not a strategy for everything. I always compare this with having a hammer. If you have a hammer, everything around you looks like a nail. So AI is the new hammer where, it's a solution to everything. No, we need business people there. And so that's why, just to conclude, the book really makes the argument business leaders today need to know their organization more than ever, to know where the work is happening, because that's where the AI needs to be, and you need to assess that from your strategy, your vision. But you need to be AI savvy enough to understand as well, what is it that you want to that humans keep doing, and what is it where AI can help? And that means business leaders today need to train themselves to have that alignment between AI comprehension and AI and organizational purpose, understanding what the vision, purpose, and the interests of the stakeholders are to bring it together. And that's why it's so essential. They're not there, but they need to be there.
Very insightful. Professor, you talk about AI as a new kind of employee rather than just a tool. How does this mental shift change the way leaders design roles, teams, and accountability in an AI-enabled organization?
Yeah. And you're saying it right here. Deepak, is AI enabled. Yeah? If business is not involved, because again, as I said, AI adoption really starts with a business question. What do you want to use AI for? So you need to define that purpose. You need to make sure that you define how AI fits into the DNA of your company and how it will serve your stakeholders, customers, society, your employees. Now, that means, yes, you bring it into the work dynamics, the workflow, and the work teams. So many people will just quickly jump on it and say it's a new employee, a new coworker. I don't call it an employee. I do call it a co-worker because, as I mentioned earlier, an AI can do one task well. The AI that's being used in companies, they can't work across tasks because that requires an understanding of different contexts and actually a model of the world. But as we know, especially large language models, they don't have a model of the world. They are basically working based on human feedback. AI agents work with closed loops of data. So if you have all the information available, AI works better. If you don't have all the information, you need a human to fill in the gaps with our intuition, our experience, but also our understanding of the business world. So that means it's an assistant at best, and that's why it's a coworker. But it doesn't have the same status as a human employee. And this is very important to realize and also to communicate. You have to use that narrative that an AI is not the same as any human employee. So that's why I always say jokingly, never name your AI agent as employee of the month, because the signal you're sending is that an AI agent is seen as equally effective as a human, is treated the same, and over time, it will replace the human. It introduces fear. But it's also not the same quality because, again, it's assisting there because it has many gaps because of its own limitations. Now, how do you see? So how do you use it? How do you introduce it is what we call a human-centered approach. So whenever you introduce AI in an organization, the first thing you need to do as a business leader, as an organization, is really make clear why you want to use it, give it meaning, and allow people in a safe environment. So you have to build trust and collaboration, and you need to install feedback loops so you can listen to your employees about their experiences, because initially you will fail because it won't work right away. And that's also how a large language model works. We give feedback and then it improves. So it's in the same way. You need to give these experimental labs, these sandboxes that people can play in and see how it fits with the work they do and where it doesn't fit. So you share the successes and you share the failures. This way you can find a balance. And again, in this sense, it becomes a co-worker in service of your employees. Hence why I said, don't make it employee of the month.
Professor, one of your central themes is aligning AI with business strategy, not the other way around. What early warning signs should leaders watch for that their AI investment are drifting away from the company's core strategy?
Yeah, it's a very nice way, the way you put it. It's not the other way around. It's not AI as a strategy. Unfortunately, what I notice most of the time, and this is worldwide, this is really everywhere. Any company who really wants to introduce AI, the pressure comes from the top. So I see boards, CEOs who are not really that AI savvy, acting out of fear of missing out. And the mantra to say so is really the biggest risk today is not using AI. So what I see is when companies say it's when they see that when I see that companies are actually implying AI is the strategy itself, usually comes along with a mindset where they approach AI as a trend rather than a leadership decision. And what I mean by this is most boards, and I'm sure you will have heard this before, and many of your listeners also, is that boards will say, oh, we need to be competitive. Everyone's using AI. We need to adopt AI. And it seems that there's a kind of magical thinking. Once we have AI, we're competitive. Now, everyone who's followed a business class or an MBA will know, no, you don't become competitive by adopting something that everyone else has. You become competitive by using it in ways that supports what makes you unique. Again, that means it's enabling. Any company that says we're AI driven always is for me a red flag, because AI driven means AI drives our company. Hence what you said, AI is the strategy in their minds. So it requires really changing that mindset. And that doesn't happen overnight. To move to that they understand what does it mean to be AI driven versus AI enabled really means AI moving from AI is the strategy to AI is an enabler of your strategy, which means it's about not replacing people. As soon as AI can do what a human does, we get rid of people. Because, by the way, it's really interesting. The most successful companies, they actually today they hire more people to make AI work. What I see happening is, because so many companies have that mindset AI strategy, they lay off people and blame AI. It's a convenient excuse. But then they realize, oh, how is AI now going to drive our productivity? Because, as I said, AI needs to be placed there where the work happens. But if you fire people, you have less of those places. So what you see is they start adding AI solutions on each other. So with a mindset of AI as a strategy, AI, it's an AI-driven company, you also see that AI is seen as just adding on, whereas it's really about integrating in how you work. If you use AI for your podcast, well, it needs to be integrated in what your workflow is in editing it, producing it, putting it out there, the marketing. It needs to find its place. It's your facilitator. It's your enabler. And that's very difficult if companies usually start with layoffs first and then bring in AI because they assume AI will drive anything. So in my consultancy, in my teaching, I really work on those mindsets. And mindsets that, if we make that shift, what you usually see is that we see more humble leadership because they're open-minded. They want to learn. So understanding that it's an AI-enabled organization also comes usually with these sandboxes that I refer to. Can you have experimental stages, collaborations between departments, sharing of failures and successes, where we learn from, and as an organization, we move forward. And the great thing about that, Deepak, is also if you can establish that kind of feedback and communication culture, what you'll see is that the company itself starts creating the jobs for the future, because they will see where AI works and where it doesn't. And it will enable the company themselves to start saying, okay, look, this is how the jobs are going to change within our organization, within our industry. And you see, if you have that knowledge and you can design like that, this is how you become competitive in using AI.
Professor, the book emphasizes complementary intelligence between humans and machines. Can you share a concrete example where this human-AI complementary created value that neither humans nor AI could have achieved alone?
Yeah. I mean, so one of the best applications of AI to illustrate that collective intelligence, that collaboration between AI agents and humans, is really in healthcare and in basically medicine, but also treatment of patients, diagnosis of patients. I also, by the way, I find it the most interesting application across the world, and the most interesting one from the point of view where I see it will really make a difference for humans. The effect is very clear there. And so there's many studies that show that, for example, for doctors, surgeons to make a diagnosis, AI is amazing to help out. So a doctor may achieve 93% accuracy, the AI may achieve 92, but together they achieve 96. And this is interesting because it's really, the increase is here because of the working together. Remember the coworker that I said? And it's also interesting because it means that most people still don't understand really that it's not human plus AI. I mean, you can have an AI everywhere. It's really about human experience plus AI. So going back to this example of making a diagnosis, is AI is already extremely accurate when looking at X-rays, for example, or looking for patterns in your blood tests. Same thing in the finance industry. When they look for fraud, for example, they look at patterns. But at the end of the day, what really pushes the increase is that it amplifies and enhances the human experience of people who've been in those jobs for 10, 20, 30 years. And where the experience is extremely useful, because it's like an HR agent who's been working in HR for 30 years. They look at a CV and they almost feel like this is a good candidate or not. And they're usually accurate because they've learned implicitly over all these years. So it's really unlocking that power of experience of a doctor, a surgeon, to make that diagnosis even better, because the AI may help to identify, oh, those are spots that I may not have noticed. But if these spots are there, what I've seen in the past, what I've noticed with patients is this may be the case. Because it's not that medicine, for example, is a fixed thing. It's not that there's not going to be any new diseases. They are. There's unknowns even out there. So you need that experience and to anticipate and see, oh, there's an outlier there, because most of the AI is statistics, and outliers are seen as errors usually. So because they try to make that pattern consistent and coherent. So it's really about human experience plus AI that where the AI enhances that extra that a human intelligence has for people who've been doing their job for so long. So healthcare is an amazing application there.
Professor, many leaders feel intense pressure to do something with AI quickly. From your 9 leadership actions, which one do you believe is the most important first step for a leader who is still at the experimentation stage?
Yeah, we've referred a few times now to sandboxes and experimenting. And I like to call it every business leader with their teams, when it comes down to bringing AI into the workflow, needs to create its own lab. And lab, I mean the sandbox. So now, of course, it's one thing to say like, oh, we're going to test it. But are your teams ready for it? That's basically what you're saying as well. So what do leaders need to do? At the higher level in the organization, it's extremely important that leaders build collaboration and trust. Those are skills. So for leaders in the new era of AI, actually being able to build relationships, information exchange, flat communication almost, because we need the feedback loops. Trust are key skills more than ever, because you want to know what went wrong, what worked, and then you synthesize and circulate that information again. And you see, as a leader, if you're AI savvy enough, you pick up that information and then you can communicate it and develop a narrative. Because what is very important here is that the tone of the top needs to do it at that level of the organization. Within your own teams, what is very important there is that you, like I said, you establish a mindset of learning, and that comes along with open-mindedness, and that is usually promoted by team leaders being humble in the sense like, yes, look, I'm using AI as well. You lead by example, but you're not the best necessarily in it. You just show it in a very simple way. And then basically in those sandboxes, in the experimentation, you use the bottom-up approach. So we have a top-down and we have a bottom-up. At the top of the company, the trust, exchange, flat communication needs to be installed to go quick. It needs to be bottom-up because you need to have the experience of the ones who are working with it. In a very funny way, I always say the top of the company likes to talk about AI, but if you look at who really uses AI, is the ones at the bottom. So you see how important bottom-up communication and feedback sharing is becoming, especially with respect to making use of AI very effectively.
Professor, you highlight the risk of creating AI as a purely technical project rather than a change management challenge. If you had to design a simple playbook for leading AI-driven change, what are the non-negotiable elements that must be in it?
Well, the very simple answer would be you definitely have to read my book, because we have 9 ways to make it work. So that's really addressing your question there. So what does this mean in terms of non-negotiables? Because yes, it's a change management project, like e-commerce was, like bringing in technologies in the past. We see that they go through the same cycles. And I think it's by now very clear in this podcast here that, yes, business leaders are involved because they need to motivate humans. They need to lower distrust, lower resistance, promote acceptance of the technology, and integrate it. All change management. So it's about organizational transformation. And it's actually very interesting to see the ones who are today are driving AI transformation, the CIOs, CTOs, IT departments. They actually say explicitly in surveys that organizational transformation and cultural building is not part of their job, but those are the ones driving it. So you see why many of these AI projects fail, because they're just not addressing that part at all. Hence, people don't use it. Now, non-negotiables there for business leaders who understand this and are employing that change management strategy is really, first of all, I referred to earlier, tone of the top, you need to provide meaning to the idea of AI in people's jobs and in the organization. People are already afraid of losing their job. Not necessarily because you say it, but it's in the media. It's everywhere. Everyone talks about this. So you need to assure. So providing meaning, and that comes along with a vision. You need to be clear, what do you use it for? The second thing, what is non-negotiable, is you need to lead by example. I mentioned this already earlier, and I see this in my own consultancy in teams. It starts very simple. As you as a leader say, like, yeah, I use Copilot, I use Claude, I use Open AI, ChatGPT or DeepSeek to write my emails. And then I edit it. You just say, like, where do you use it for? It's something very simple. And how you use it, that's important. I'm stressing this because, again, it's important that as a leader, you need to be AI savvy. You don't need to be the best coder. You don't need to be the computer scientist. No way. Leaders make their teams perform better, so leaders can synthesize and actually use it, and the information goes up. So it's the same thing here. That's the second non-negotiable, leading by example to empower your team to say, like, look, it's meaningful. I'm using it myself. And then finally, really develop the skills of people. And this is where you will see AI literacy is important for them as well, but also the skills that are needed to really leverage AI. And that is, people need to collaborate. You want to use people's experience. Remember, I said human experience plus AI. And human experience is basically the strengths of a human intelligence that an AI doesn't possess, which is that model of the world, which means critical thinking, meta thinking, seeing the bigger picture, relying on the experience of their job, cultivating their emotional intelligence to work together to share information, making sure they ask the right questions. So what is non-negotiable is also that you stick to the command and control leadership styles. Today, with AI, that doesn't work. So those are things that you really have to think about as a leader, because again, the idea is there to get this AI tool working.
Professor, putting people front and center is a recurring message in your work. How can leaders use AI to genuinely enhance employee performance and well-being rather than just to monitor, automate, or cut costs?
Yeah, I think you phrased this very well, because AI needs to provide value, and value for the organization, but also value for stakeholders. Ultimately, value for the ones who designed AI, which are humans, humanity. It's a very simple logic, although we don't always see it. Now, I like your framing because you mentioned performance, productivity, but also well-being. So what ideally you would like to see is that AI creates holistic value, not only narrow value. Only focused on productivity and efficiency is, of course, good for business, but it has a mindset of basically seeing AI as the driver of economic value. People are involved, we know. So they are not only motivated based on economic motives, they're also motivated by belonging in the organization, that they feel competent, because people feel a lot of loss of control if the organization puts AI first, because you have no control over your job, your future. That demotivates people. And also their standing and their growth, whether they can start performing better. So I always say AI, with respect to creating holistic value, is what I like to call human AIization. I put AI in the middle of the word humanity, humanization. AI is a catalysator of the growth of your people. So that's why this well-being is also important. And now, very quickly, to put this in context, why is the well-being related to the value that AI also creates in addition to productivity? Is because what we see often is companies use AI, it may enhance your performance, and it frees up time. So let's say that you could do the podcast in 30 minutes rather than an hour compared to half a year ago. What do you do with that half an hour? If you keep doing more of these and doing the same thing again, you'll probably be productive on the short term because you'll get more podcasts out. The same thing in a company, you'll become more productive, but you get burned out probably more because you're also not thinking anymore. You're not being creative. And that's what we're saying. You want to use that extra time to enhance what people are really good at. Creativity, thinking out of the box. That's why those soft skills are so important to enhance, like critical thinking and curiosity and asking the questions. You want time for that as well, because this is what we've always been complaining about in organizations before AI even. We don't have time anymore. It's simply the production line the whole time. So this is our chance to actually get better at innovation and hence being more efficient ultimately at service towards customers. So you want to use that rather than use it for those things rather than deplete your employees. So you see, this is actually a human-centered approach. Putting humans first, AI second. I hear too many companies saying AI first. And AI first, what does this mean then to people? Oh, it's a cost-cutting mindset. It's only about cutting costs, whereas AI should be seen as creating value and growth. Because it's about competition, no? Yes, you can be competitive on the short term by cutting your prices, but a race to the bottom always never ends well, never. It's towards the future is the growth, your redesign, and your reimagination of the organization. And that requires still, you need to work again with your people. So it's humans first, AI second. And I've explained how that relationship between human experience and AI can work to achieve that. Now, how do you make that clear? I've referred a few times already to the narratives you use, the communication, the actions you take. They are all signals of what do you value the most. Now, again, most companies are still stuck in it's cost cutting only. And like I said, we see many companies laying off people because they believe that the AI will do the job. That's where most of the failures arrive, because where did they put the AI? They need the humans to make it work. So just an example, personal example. I see this in many companies, but this was a multinational pharmaceutical. And they said, okay, we're going to adopt AI. It's a town hall meeting. Of course, people want to know the meaning. Yeah? Where's the organization going? And of course, they have this fear. And usually what happens is that it's the tech officer who explains this. Now, they have a certain narrative. They focus on the technology. And usually after all these town halls, I always hear, yeah, but what does it mean for me? I didn't understand. Or, yeah, but what's going to happen in our team? So you need to have the right tone, the right connection. You need to be close to the people in explaining this. And that's why I said earlier, non-negotiable is providing meaning and having the right narrative here. And that is still human-centered, because distrust and resistance does not disappear automatically simply by being exposed to the technology. The human psychology doesn't work like that. So that's important. The second thing why it's really important is you want people to, even if they're willing to do so, to work with AI, you want them to be able to work intuitively with their own strengths. And if you can work with in a way that you feel like, okay, you're in control, you're using what you're really good at, the AI will actually accelerate this. Now, what we see is quite often AI, the algorithms, the tools are not designed based on how humans work, but usually we ask humans to think like a computer so they can learn to work with AI. And that is one thing that doesn't necessarily work well, because recent research shows if you ask people to think like a computer, they lose the skills that we want them to keep: critical thinking, curiosity, emotional intelligence, driving the transformation and facilitating it. They lose it. I can give you many findings there, but the overall finding is indeed that thinking like a computer and using it leads people not to ask the right questions anymore. So we're losing on the long term. So human-centered approaches is also a sustainable strategy. Cutting costs, like I said, with a race to the bottom is a short-term strategy. Now, AI is a technology and it's change management. And change management is a U-curve, remember? You start changing something, initially the performance goes down because people have to adjust to it. They have to learn about it. Once they have the skills, they still take some time. Now, the interesting thing is technology also has a U-curve. So we're all blinded by the market, the stock market, which is still short term. We're saying there's no return on investment. But if you think about it, if the technology is a U-curve, the real value will show itself on the longer term. So we have to align these things. Humans and change work like this, and the technology works like this. So it's only logical that you employ that collaborative, human-centered approach.
Professor, ethical and responsible AI is now every board agenda, but often remains abstract. What practical routines or habits can leaders build into their decision making so that ethics becomes part of everyday AI use, not just a compliance checkbox?
Yeah. Ethical and responsible AI it's like I said, it's fashionable. People talk about it, but it's the same as in the financial crisis or in any other crisis. When it comes down to compliance, the ethics and the responsible part actually disappears very quickly, and we look at compliance in terms of rules, ticking boxes, making sure all of that is there. Governance needs to be there. Now, so this is already a very important thing to mention, because if you look at from a geopolitical point of view, what is happening today, you see actually there's almost like two camps emerging: deregulation versus very firm regulation. And the most common examples are the EU is very much focused on rules, but they don't have innovation. By the way, I don't agree with this, that if you have regulation that you can be innovative. That is not true. The US, complete deregulation. Now, I said earlier, even if you ask the CEOs of the Magnificent Seven, what will be the future of AI, they don't know. They're projecting their desires and their wishes and their ambitions. So if we don't really know, it's only normal that if it needs to serve humanity, human AIization, we need some guardrails. So complete deregulation, I don't believe in it with respect to technology, because it doesn't impose a risk which will be, if it happens, which will be very difficult to deal with and manage it later on. So what do we do? So how do we, like you said, it remains abstract. How do we make it more concrete? So first of all, I think the psychology of AI is here important. What we see more and more is that people, and I see this in higher education as well as the dean of a business school, is that people value authenticity. So there's, just like at one point, ethical products send a very strong signal, the moral fiber of an organization, and people want to pay for it. Now, there's a movement now as well that people want to know where the human is involved, and where the human is involved, those services and products become more attractive. And if they become more attractive, people want to pay for it. So it's a business model in itself. So authenticity is already important here. That's interesting, because we know that being ethical means that you can make choices. You can make a choice based on your goals, your values, your intentions, because you're in the world. And AI cannot make a choice because it doesn't have judgment. It can make a decision because that's calculative, that's statistics, but it cannot make a choice. So we want to keep that because, like I said, AI works best in closed loops of data. Once you have all the information, the AI recognizes pattern, unbeatable, like chess. Chess has a finite number of rules. No human can beat AI anymore in chess. But the reality is muddy. And as we say, when it comes down to ethics, compliance quite often is a gray zone. It requires a judgment. So that's why, for example, as a dean, I always say as well, in the AI era, we need a lot of ethical upskilling. People need to be trained in having a moral compass and looking towards the future in ways where they see conflicts of interest. They need to be trained. So that means don't suppress your ethical voices in your company. You need that diversity of opinion. Yeah. So you need to encourage that. How do you encourage that as a leader? By making sure that in meetings, you make sure that voices are there, not only for the extrovert people, also for the introvert people, that you push your teams to ask questions. That's why it's so important to be humble and saying, I'm open-minded. I want to discuss. It needs to be constructive. It can't go on all the time with remarks that make no sense, but as a leader, you have to foster that kind of exchange culture. Also share AI failures. I mean, okay, this went wrong. Rather than blaming, I know it's a soft word, but it's almost like a trusting forgiveness culture as well. We need to learn. If we need to learn, we need to discuss AI failures. We also need to make sure that people understand they are accountable. AI is not accountable. You can't say, I shot someone, but it was the gun who pulled the trigger. I mean, because it was the trigger that went there. The gun shot the person, not me. That doesn't work with AI. We don't have that legal framework. So that means people need to understand their responsibilities, hence the ethical upskilling. But as leaders, you also need to establish clear norms. And that relates to incentives, or what are you rewarded for? What are you responsible for? So people understand very quickly, if this is what I'm rewarded for, that's where they take the responsibility. And this is a big issue because when AI comes in and you treat it as simply another employee, people will be afraid that, for example, in certain tasks, and especially innovation, that they will not be rewarded if they use AI, because the company may say, well, you came up with the idea because of AI, I don't give you the bonus. You see, if you introduce this, you are going to lose the human creativity. It's very important to introduce norms where people will still be rewarded, or people will be considered responsible if something goes wrong. You need to put those norms out there. So this is a lot of leadership behaviors, promoting the right moral norms, leading by example, the authenticity as a business strategy, but also governance is important. So I see, so you have two types of champions that you need to build. Ethics champions, those are those voices, and then governance champions, where you need it. This is where centers of excellence can help. I see there's AI centers and they centralize everything. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking really about governance where people can go to, and if they want to stay updated on really the legal framework. And again, humans, how do they respond to this? If you keep repeating, awareness is very important. If you have that kind of culture where that openness is, then basically people take into account the interests of their stakeholders much more quickly and also feel more responsible for that. And that's what you want to achieve, because things will go wrong with using AI because you experiment with it. So it's very important that you can establish such a culture.
Professor, in the book you show that storytelling and communication are still core leadership skills in the AI era. How should leaders talk about AI with their employees to reduce fear, build trust, and encourage experimentation?
Well, I think during our conversation here, I think one key aspect has really been communication and narratives. Because basically, as leaders, you build cultures, and no one likes to take the lead in this. So it's part of your responsibility as a leader. So yes, storytelling, communication are important. Storytelling, I relate to what I said earlier, lead by example. You can share your own stories, your own problems, how difficult you find it. It's just signaling AI is here, we're all learning, and try to make it a collective, participative, top-down, bottom-up process. Very important. The communication itself is, like I said, I think what is important is that you have a flat communication culture again. A large language model works based on feedback, prompts. You provide a context, you provide a question, you get content, you verify, you edit, you ask another question, and in that sense, it becomes a co-worker, as we explained. Now, this is how you have to work with your teams as well. So you see, if there's an alignment and there's a consistency in working, the integration will go so much smoother. But what is important, if that communication works, it will also be able to remove or reduce administrative bottlenecks. Because if you just do a ticking the box mentality, there is no communication. And the second advantage is really with that right of kind of communication, and people learn, people will get their ownership. And if they get their ownership, they will become more resilient. And that is extremely important for any organization today in the AI era, to be resilient. Because if you're resilient, you can adapt quickly, learn, and move further. And you see, that is really the experimentation mindset that AI adoption requires.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. You warn of a generation of AI transformation failures. If leaders do not change how they lead, if a CEO comes to you today and says, I want my organization to be AI savvy in 3 years, what are the top 2 or 3 mindset shifts you would insist they make immediately?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's important for people, and that's a mind shift, a mindset shift already, that the next decade of AI adoption will be about business transformation. It will not necessarily be about getting even more advanced technology. What we see today is the focus is usually on what I call input of AI models. You see, and we're very much focused, and I call it input, on how we improve by throwing billions at the AI model, that they get more accurate. What we're more interested in is, can we make even the less accurate models? I mean, or it doesn't even matter how accurate it is. Can we leverage AI? Can we put it to work that it creates value? And that is not really a focus of the tech companies. Tech companies are selling a solution. How to implement it, how to do it, they don't provide that consultancy. So what I see is that many companies are suddenly starting to realize this because they don't customize. So they have to start learning from each other. Like, how do you do it? How do you design your own model? So that's having that awareness that the next decade is really about business transformation, really brings that, hopefully, that first mind shift that we've been talking about today of AI is not a strategy. AI can enable your strategy, but you need to customize it, integrate it, and make it part of the narrative and of how the workflows will become restructured to reimagine your company. First big mindset. Second thing is that it requires human-centeredness. That means AI adoption is a behavioral exercise, much more than a technological journey only. Of course, engineering and behavioral mindsets need to work together because you need to tech, but it requires that collaboration emergence. There's less silos. So we need to get rid of these silos, which means, second mindset, it's a change management process. And thirdly, I like to emphasize, usually, as engineers, we like to talk about an end-to-end process, but the end-to-end is really here. We bring the AI in, and it needs to happen throughout the whole entire organization. It's total quality management, because ultimately you need to have that vision. Which interests are you serving? Your organization, but also customers, society, your employees, because they need to be able to work with it. Customers need to be able to accept it. Because you can invest a lot in these models, but if it's not being used or it just doesn't work for a customer, because don't forget, the AI that you expose your customers to need to be worked with at the highest level possible already by your employees. So if your employees are not even equipped enough, or you're not AI ready, don't promise this to customers. So really that end-to-end process, which means there's a lot of holistic value to be considered. I think those are very important things to realize. What does AI adoption really mean?
Thank you very much, Professor David, for sharing such insightful perspectives on AI, leadership, and the future of work. Your reflections on how leaders can take back control and make AI truly work for people and organizations have given us a lot to think about and act on. We deeply appreciate your time, your clarity of thought, and real world examples you brought to this conversation. It's been an absolute privilege to be with you today, and I'm sure our listeners will carry these ideas into their own leadership journeys. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Deepak, for having me. And people can always reach out to me, type in my name, or go to my personal website, www.daveddecremer.com, or check out some of my Harvard Business Review pieces. I'm always available. Thank you.
Okay.